Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger.
Every week, George and I sit down in front of our computer webcams and bring you the news in the Anglican world. And we're actually spreading out and offering our own opinions and other things too. But we're going to talk about several different topics today. First, we're going to add a new segment to Anglican Unscripted called This Day in History. Now, we'll only add this when it's actually important, but July 26th, 30 years ago, what was happening?
Today was the wedding of Prince Charles and Princess Diana.
Oh, that's not fair. You knew.
Well, every little girl's fantasy came true that day. The fairy tale wedding.
Mm-hmm.
I was a teenager at the time, and I had little to no interest in it. But at the time. But it was one of the most popular worldwide television events, I think, ever.
Yeah, it was another one of those things like the first space shuttle launch where you could get up early and go to, if you had cable TV, go to CNN, or at that time, all three of the broadcast channels covered it. But at 5:40 a.m., whatever Eastern or Central Time zone was back then, now for a 13-year-old boy, getting up at 5:40, July 26th in the middle of summer was impossible. It wasn't going to happen. But I'm certain my parents got up and watched it, and it was the event of the decade, certainly, and it was a fairy tale wedding. And Princess Di herself turned out to be a real great fairy tale princess. She had a great ministry with, at that time, AIDS victims, HIV victims, and poverty in Africa, and really turned out to be an amazing woman.
When Prince Charles came, 15 people turned out to say hello. The Princess of Wales came, the entire world came.
She really was a wonderful mother. I mean, she was terribly involved with her children.
She would very often take them out on the streets of London to talk to the homeless and have conversations with the homeless and just experience the other side of life.
There was a little girl. She said to me, "Who is that? Is she an angel?"
Why would somebody like that come to see somebody like me?
And she had an appeal that went across cultures and nations. I know some Pakistani girls who, at the time, were just so enthralled and in love by the image of Princess Diana. It was, if you will, a Barbie doll for teens and adults come to life. She really, reached across generations and cultures, and people just loved her. Everybody but Prince Charles.
Yes, and sadly, I mean, it's one of those things that had all the makings of a fairy tale, but added in tragedy in her death in a tunnel in France.
Yeah, I moved to England that week when she died, and I would see Princess Di on the TV, and I would register for a few seconds, but it wasn't where my life would stop, where I would stare at her. Mm-hmm. But when I got to England, the outpouring of grief and emotion at her death just was amazing. It was, I wasn't around when Kennedy was shot, but the way people described that was the way Princess Diana's death struck people, certainly in England.
Yeah, I was now more modern times. I mean, this is in the mid-90s, but I remember just about to go to bed, went over to TV and was about to turn off, and breaking news. And this channel had gathered some lackey from the back and threw a tie on him and threw a sports jacket on him because this was big news. And he came on and announced the death of Princess Di. And it wasn't quite the effect of a Howard Cosell announcing the death of John Lennon, or a Walter Cronkite announcing the death of JFK, but for our time, that was a very modern and incredible tragedy. We've had another famous Anglican die this week, whose influence is unmeasurable compared to many others. His name was John Scott, a writer of 50 books, and a person who understood Article 26, making the word known and easy to understand to everybody, a real part of his life. Tell me a little bit more about John Scott.
Well, John Stott, in 2005, Time magazine put out a little article on the 100 most influential people in the world today. And John Stott was on there. Billy Graham wasn't, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
John Stott was probably one of the two most influential, important Anglicans, Episcopalians of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
In 400 or 500 years, I think people will be aware of who John Stott was, when Kevin Kallsen and George Conger have long passed into dust and memory, and only video archives and archaeologists these guys were.
Well, we go the way of the Wayne's World. Yes, he will remain an influence beyond his time. Now, it wasn't just that he was a great preacher and a great writer, but it was his ability to communicate with the common layperson in his writings. Basic Christianity was a book that when I picked up, I go, this guy gets it, and now I get it.
Not just the common layperson, but the common priest, people like me. For me, Stott was an expositor of the Bible par excellence. Billy Graham said that he is ranked up there with the 16th century reformers, people like Calvin and Cranmer and all that.
Sure.
John Stott, and that's Billy Graham talking, not George Conger.
Sure.
John Stott was somebody who could make this. The Bible was sufficient. It was clear. It was God's word delivered. And how should I describe it? He was somebody who could make the words of Scripture so come alive and so speak that when you finished reading, you didn't think, gee, John Stott was a great writer. You thought, the Bible's speaking to me, and I understand what they're talking about. I have to admit that maybe many, not all, but maybe 95% of my sermons have been cribbed from John Stott. That's an exaggeration. Because I have two sermons, but John.
Well, and that's a wonderful, interesting part of John Stott is people go, oh, this global South thing that's happening right now. Where did they come from? Well, little beknownst to most of the world is he was a founding member or starter of the Lucerne Foundation, which is a global evangelism society. He also helped with the Langdon Trust, which taught biblical scholarship to Africans and
it's
other places.
Scholarships for the third world and the developing world for pastors, not just Anglicans, but pastors from all Christian denominations, to study God's word.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the explosion of the global South Church has been through this devotion to the Scriptures and the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
John Stott is the reason why we have evangelical Anglicans today. Otherwise, that portion of the church would have faded away in the 60s.
Yeah.
I'm certain of that.
Definitely. All right. Well, I need to make another announcement. This is important for Anglican Unscripted. We have our first sponsor. And it's kind of exciting in our third episode to actually have somebody willing to pay and put a spot on. But apparently our numbers are good enough. We have 2 people watching us, your mom and my mom. But it's and probably somebody from tech. And it's enough influence that people are willing to pay, and this is their ad.
Hi, I'm Phil Ashey from the American Anglican Council. Every week we produce a 2-minute teaching video on a current event from an Orthodox Anglican perspective. Come join us at americananglican.org/Anglican Perspective.
So wasn't that neat having our very first sponsor, George?
Yeah, we had hoped that Texaco would kick in and we'd have the Texaco Anglican Hour, but they haven't got back to us yet.
No. And Mutual of Omaha has not responded to any of my emails either. So, which is good because we don't want to go out and hunt alligators. All right, on to,
We've got a few in the back if you'd like to wrestle them.
I'm fine, but send me a suitcase when you get a chance. So, the next news story, and it's a very big news story, it's terrorism. In Norway this week, a gentleman exploded a large bomb in a populous city trying to take out the political machine of Norway. He also took a gun on a boat and went to an island and managed to shoot down 60 or 70 people. The story to us as Americans is not amazing. We've seen terrorism before. What was interesting to me about this story is trying to identify his motivations. And the first news stories coming out were Christian fundamentalist kills hundreds of people in Norway. Then it's Christian extremist. And then everything with the Christian label possible was attributed to this guy. But this morning I got my version of the Church of England News, and I learned that he was not a Christian. I read your story, George. Why don't you tell me a little bit about this sick individual?
Well, Anders Behring Breivik on last Friday, exploded a bomb and killed 8 people in central Norway, in central Oslo. And then he went on a ferry and went to an island off the coast where a youth camp being run by the country's Labour Party was taking place, and he shot 68 people. So I think there's 75 to 76 dead. Man's a nut. His attorney, when he was arraigned, said that he believes his client's insane. I'm fairly confident that he's insane. Shortly before he went on his rampage, he posted a 1,500-page manifesto onto the internet, and I spent the weekend reading it. First 2/3 are clippings from newspaper articles about the decline of European culture and the influx of Islam into Europe. And he draws from people all across the spectrum, commentators, bloggers, Jeremy Clarkson, who's an English fellow who has a TV show called Top Gear. He's quoted extensively, he's quoted also. So there's nothing really that odd in that first 2/3. And then the author, Breivik, comes in, and what he's going to do about it, he's going to start a war and kick all the Muslims out of Europe, and then go after all the communists in Europe. And if blood's got to flow, blood's got to flow. And he and 9 others have formed the new Knights Templar, and they have invited all Europe to join them in their crusade to restore Christendom. And at that point, people stop listening, say, aha, he's a Christian right-wing fanatic. Where's Jerry Falwell?
That's right.
But if you actually read his stuff, he's quite clear. He says, I do not believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in Europe's Christian culture. And what Breivik believes in is European, he's a nationalist, or a Volkish, as the Germans would say. He believes the Nordic Volk culture that these dark-skinned foreigners are bringing down and corrupting. And Behring is quite clear, he is not a Christian. Anybody, and he talks about Christian atheists, like himself, can join this crusade. He also is he talks about how we need to enlist the Hindus and the Buddhists to combat Islam, and then he attacks Christian missionaries in India for watering down the anti-Islamic firmament of Hinduism. So he's the only Christian, if he's a Christian fundamentalist, he's the only one I know who's pro-Obama, pro-gay, pro-environmentalist. He likes Vladimir Putin, and he doesn't like Jesus Christ, and thinks the Christian ethos of loving your neighbor as yourself is BS. He's not a Christian, but why is this important? It's because the press in Europe, the left-wing culture of Europe, has decided, oh, here's an example of what Christians are really like. And the response, not the tragedy, which is awful, and I don't wish to take anything of it, but the response that many European opinion makers have had to this is one of knee-jerk anti-Christianity.
I have on the other line Alan Haley. We're going to talk a little bit about the New York same-sex law and how it applies to the church. you're currently in California, where you also have seen the struggles with propositions and the issue of same-sex marriage. Here in New York, it's a strange dichotomy. It was just passed by or signed by Andrew Cuomo, the governor, and we have a church in Tech that really wants to go with this, but we have bishops in dioceses who, some do want to go with it, some don't know what to do with it, and some absolutely refuse to go near it. What's your perception on the ground?
New York is all over the map. There are 6 dioceses, as I understand it, and they've split. 2 are allowing priests to perform same-sex marriages in the church. 2 are saying, well, you can do blessings but not marriages, and the other 2 are saying no. So if you're in New York itself, New York City itself, if you live in, as I understand it, in Manhattan, Bronx, or Staten Island, you can be blessed but not actually married. And if you live in Queens or Brooklyn, you can be married in an Episcopal church. So, but the whole point is that any authorization to carry out a marriage in an Episcopal church by an Episcopal priest of 2 couples of the same sex violates the church canons as they currently are written, and General Convention has not changed those.
Right. Canon 18 specifically states that the bishop has to be sure it's between a man and a woman, that they are both in agreement that this is a long-term, lifelong relationship. There's very specific conditions that the canon calls for.
Correct.
This new law violates that canon completely.
Right, and it's on that ground that the 2 bishops who forbade the performance of same-sex marriages stated their reasons. They said it's not in conformity with the canons. It's also not in conformity with the rubrics of the Book of Common Prayer. Now, at General Convention 2009, they passed a resolution allowing bishops to, quote-unquote, have a pastoral response to same-sex couples. But nothing General Convention did, by the way of a resolution, could have authorized bishops to violate the canons or to allow their priests to violate the canons. And so essentially what we've got here, despite all the fanfare about new canons, we've got, again, bishops simply saying, we'll make up the law as we go along. Priests in my diocese are free to marry same-sex couples, and we won't prosecute them under the new canons.
Right. Well,
and the bishop says, no, there's no prosecution. That's the end of it, regardless of how many violations occur.
And that's another interesting problem here, is there is no official marriage for same-sex couples in the prayer book or any existing prayer book in the Anglican Church.
Correct.
So these ceremonies step way outside our current theology, doctrine, and practice.
Correct.
So
I saw J.I. Packer brought that home very beautifully in a piece that was up, I think, at an interview that was he gave recently. And
he was in Florida with, I forget the preacher's name, a very famous guy from Mars Bible Church.
That's right.
Oh, I'm so embarrassed. I think I have Friday brain today. I've been talking to so many people.
His interview made it clear he thought it was heretical for them to, disregard scriptural teachings like that and teach that same sexes could be married in the church.
Okay. Well, it's neat when I get to talk to a lawyer quickly. Why can't we, as lay people or clergy, hold our church accountable and say you can't do that? What are these difficulties?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the new procedures under the new disciplinary canons give the bishop and the intake officer an absolute veto on proceeding with charges. Anybody can lodge the charges, and the intake officer has to look at them and make a report. But he can turn it down, and if his bishop upholds him, then that's the end of it. Or if it goes to an appeal, it's a 3-man committee of which the bishop and the intake officer form 2. And so 2 out of the 3. So they can simply stop the whole process right there. It's
that's a strange thing. Okay, this new Title 14 brings up another question. Can the presiding bishop, Catherine Jefferts Schori, compel or force Bishop Love or any bishop to perform same-sex marriages in their diocese?
She could try issuing a pastoral directive to that effect, but it would be unconstitutional and uncanonical, and it would also, be, theoretically, because it would be unconstitutional, could open her up to canonical charges, because pastoral directives are supposed to be in accordance with the canons. And so, I don't know why General Convention doesn't, they feel so strongly about this. They should have started amending the canons before this. And amending the canons, of course, won't solve everything, because they still have to amend the prayer book, and that will take 2 sessions of General Convention to complete.
Yeah, their theology is behind their prayer book, or ahead of their prayer book, I should say, by many decades.
Yes, 2015, before the prayer book could ever be amended.
Yeah. And then by that time, we need to start including polygamy. I mean, what are we going to do? So I want to thank you for we're doing Anglican Unscripted here. We're going to call this the new legal segment. If each week we're adding you to the program, because there's so many different legal issues that we're going to be discussing. Next week I want to cover what's happening in Nevada with the lawsuits going on, with actions that then Bishop Catherine Jefferts Schori did well, bringing in a Roman Catholic clergyman into her diocese. And that'll be interesting at that time. But thank you, Alan Haley, for your time. And
okay.
It was a great segment.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
I'm on the line here with the Bishop of Albany, Bishop Bill Love. And we're going to discuss here for a few moments the ramifications of a new law passed here in New York State. A law that says that any same-sex couple can be married, which is certainly a violation of the canons of our church. But I'm wondering what the ramifications are for the Diocese of Albany.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Unfortunately, this was not unexpected. We had hoped and prayed that it would not happen, but there's been a movement for the last several years in New York to try to pass a same-gender, same-sex marriage legislation. In anticipation of that, the Diocese of Albany, few years ago in 2008 at our diocesan convention, we passed 2 canons, which is pretty much explained the diocese's understanding of marriage and how the clergy and the Diocese of Albany would participate in the sacrament of marriage, and both canons recognize that marriage, as we understand God intended it, was to be between one man and one woman, and it is that union that the church can participate in and bless when we believe that it is a union desire of the couple to include God and our Lord and the marriage in their marriage together. And so the 2 canons pretty much stipulate what we can and can't do in terms of participation in marriage ceremonies. So if you'd like, I can just share those with you, and that will help clarify where we are. I just recently sent out a pastoral letter to the diocese, again reminding the clergy and the people of the action that was taken in 2008. And Canon 16.1 states that a member of the clergy resident in or licensed to serve in this diocese shall neither officiate at, nor facilitate, nor participate in any service, whether public or private, for the celebration or blessing of a marriage, or any other union except between one man and one woman. Unions other than those of one man and one woman in holy matrimony, even if they be recognized in other jurisdictions, shall be neither recognized nor blessed in this diocese. Canon 16.2 states, properties owned, controlled, managed, or operated by this diocese or any parish of the diocese or any legal entity established by the diocese or a parish of the diocese shall not be the site of any service, public or private, for the celebration or blessing of a marriage or any other union except those between one man and one woman. So essentially, those two canons outline how we will respond to anyone who comes to the church and asks to be married, and so those are the guidelines that we have. That was overwhelmingly passed by about 80% of the diocese a few years ago at the 2008 convention, and that's the guidelines that we will continue to follow, which is essentially what the church has practiced up until now.
Yeah, I mean that's 2,000 years of church policy right there, and they're very concise canons. You have a very good canon lawyer, with the way the law is written right now, they aren't forcing churches to marry. Do you foresee a time in the future that the law changes and churches are forced to adhere to this law?
No one knows for sure what's going to happen. I'm very thankful that the New York State legislation and the governor saw the wisdom in allowing those of us who are unable to support this law to have the freedom not to participate in it. And it's my hope and prayer that understanding continues. I'm sure that there are individuals who would like to eliminate any possibility of me or others from declining to officiate at the marriage of a same-sex union, but that's again, nobody knows how that's going to turn out. But at the time being, we do have that flexibility, and so the canons that were passed, even though other Episcopal dioceses in New York State may choose to respond differently. In fact, most of them have chosen to respond differently. We still have the flexibility within the diocese to honor that which we believe the Lord is calling us to in terms of exercising the sacrament of marriage within the church.
Do you expect any pressure from the national church on this?
Again, I pray that there is not. In the pastoral directive or the pastoral letter that was sent out to the clergy and people of the diocese, I did copy the presiding bishop. I also copied the other bishops in New York State, and so they're all aware of the policies within Albany, and so far I've not heard any response from anyone regarding that.
See, the courts are everywhere, and it's the law. Well, I could go on forever, and Alan Haley is the guy who knows.
Yeah, in fact, what we all may have talked about the last 10 minutes may be completely edited out. Who knows? We'll just see how good this Alan Haley really is. But that's this week's news in Anglicanism. We certainly mourn for those who mourn with John Stott. Yeah, I'm so good at names. And we certainly mourn for those who mourn in Norway. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger.
And we want to thank you for watching Anglican Scripted.
Thank you.